Most people don't realize they are under attack because nothing dramatic is happening. There is no collapse, no obvious crisis, just a quiet shift inside. Less clarity, less energy, less direction. And because life still looks normal, the warning signs are dismissed. But this is how spiritual attack succeeds. Not by destroying you all at once, but by slowly weakening your awareness until you stop questioning what feels off. There are attacks that come loudly, and then there are attacks that succeed precisely because they are quiet. Most people imagine spiritual attack as chaos, fear, or sudden disaster. But the most effective attacks rarely announce themselves. They enter subtly. They blend into daily life. They disguise themselves as normal thoughts, harmless habits, or emotional states you explain away as stress or fatigue. By the time you notice something is wrong, your clarity has already been weakened. This is why so many people feel disconnected, drained, or lost without ever understanding why. A spiritual attack does not always aim to destroy you immediately. Often it aims to distract you first, to dull your awareness, to pull you slightly off alignment, because once alignment is weakened, resistance fades. What follows is not collapse, but erosion. Slow enough to ignore, familiar enough to tolerate, and dangerous enough to cost you years. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that because they are functioning, they are protected. You can work, smile, socialize, and still be under attack. Spiritual interference does not require visible breakdown. It requires access to your thoughts, emotions, focus, and inner authority. And most people unknowingly give that access away. The first red flag most people ignore is persistent mental fog. Not ordinary tiredness, but a constant dullness where focus feels harder than it should. You forget small things. You lose your train of thought. You feel mentally scattered even during calm moments. This fog is dangerous because clarity is the first line of defense. When clarity fades, discernment weakens. And when discernment weakens, influence increases. Another overlooked sign is sudden loss of motivation for things that once mattered to you, not because you consciously chose to stop, but because the desire quietly disappeared. Spiritual attack often targets purpose. It does not remove it outright. It makes it feel distant, heavy, or unimportant. You procrastinate without reason. You delay what once energized you. Feel resistance where there used to be flow. A third red flag appears as unexplained emotional heaviness. You wake up already tired. Your mood drops without a clear cause. Gratitude feels forced. Joy feels muted. This is not always depression. It is often oppression, a subtle weight pressing on the inner world, making everything feel harder than it should. Another sign is irritation without proportion. Small things trigger big reactions. Patience shortens, compassion thins. You snap and feel confused about why. Spiritual attack often disrupts emotional regulation because emotional instability makes you reactive. And reactive people are easier to influence. Pay attention to sudden isolation that doesn't bring peace. There is a difference between healthy solitude and withdrawal that feels empty. When you start pulling away from others and from yourself, not for clarity, but from exhaustion, something is interfering with your inner balance. Another red flag is constant distraction. You try to sit still and your mind races. You try to focus and interruptions multiply. Noise increases. Internal or external, spiritual attack thrives in chaos because chaos prevents stillness and stillness restores power. You may also notice increased self-doubt that feels foreign, thoughts that question your worth, your direction, your intuition. Thoughts that don't feel like your own but feel persistent. These thoughts don't argue loudly, they whisper consistently. And whispers repeated long enough start to sound like truth. One of the most ignored signs is resistance to spiritual practices that once grounded you. Prayer feels dry, reflection feels heavy. Stillness feels uncomfortable. You avoid the very things that would strengthen you without realizing why. This resistance is not accidental. Another red flag is distorted perception of time. Days blur together, weeks disappear. You feel busy but unfulfilled. Time passes, yet nothing meaningful seems to move forward. Spiritual attack often steals time by dulling intention. The final red flag in this first layer is numbness, not pain. Numbness. You feel disconnected from your inner voice. You go through motions without presence. You survive, but you are not fully alive. This is one of the most dangerous states because numbness feels safer than pain. But it silences warning signals. Most people ignore these signs because none of them look dramatic. They look like normal life, stress, fatigue, mood swings. But when these patterns persist, cluster and deepen, they are not random. They are signals. One of the most effective ways a spiritual attack operates is by convincing you that the thoughts in your mind are all your own. Not every thought arrives as an intrusion. Many arrive disguised as logic, memory, or realism. They sound familiar. They use your own voice. That is what makes them dangerous. You don't resist them because you don't recognize them as influence. A major red flag is repetitive, negative thinking that feels automatic. Not reflective thinking, but looping thoughts that lead nowhere. The same doubts replay, the same worries return. The same fears resurface even after you've reasoned through them before. This repetition is not insight. It is erosion. Another sign is sudden emotional cycles that don't match your circumstances. You may feel anxious during calm periods, heavy during moments that should feel neutral, or discouraged even when nothing has gone wrong. When emotions lose proportion to reality, something is interfering with emotional alignment. Spiritual attack often works by amplifying inner conflict. You feel torn between choices that once felt clear. You second-guess decisions after making them. You revisit resolved issues. This internal division weakens confidence and delays action. Pay attention to how guilt is used. Healthy guilt leads to correction. Manipulated guilt leads to paralysis. You feel guilty for resting, guilty for setting boundaries, guilty for saying no. This kind of guilt does not produce growth. It produces self-betrayal. Another subtle tactic is emotional exhaustion without clear cause. You haven't done more, yet you feel drained. Your emotional energy feels lower than your physical energy. This exhaustion is often the result of constant internal resistance. Fighting thoughts, suppressing feelings, holding tension you can't name. Spiritual attack also distorts perception of self. You begin focusing excessively on flaws while minimizing strengths. You remember mistakes more vividly than progress. This imbalance in self-perception feeds discouragement and weakened identity. Notice if your inner dialogue becomes harsher than it used to be. Thoughts that criticize, belittle, or rush you. Thoughts that remove grace from your process. This voice often masquerades as discipline, but its effect is depletion, not growth. Another red flag is increased reactivity. You respond emotionally faster than usual. Small triggers feel larger. Your patience shortens. Reactivity reduces discernment, and discernment is essential for spiritual defense. Spiritual interference also targets hope, not by removing it completely, but by making it feel unrealistic. You still believe in possibility, just not for yourself. Pay attention to resistance towards stillness. Silence feels uncomfortable. Slowing down feels unsafe. When the mind avoids quiet, it's often because quiet would expose what's influencing it. Another sign is distorted urgency. Everything feels pressing. There's always something demanding attention. This keeps you reactive instead of intentional. You may also notice emotional numbness alternating with emotional spikes. High irritation followed by flatness. This instability is not balance, it's dysregulation. One of the most overlooked red flags is loss of inner dialogue clarity. You stop hearing your intuition clearly, guidance feels muted, decisions feel heavier. Spiritual attack thrives in unchecked inner environments. What you do not examine can influence you freely. Spiritual attack rarely begins by changing who you are, it begins by changing what you do. Small shifts, subtle changes in routine, habits you once kept without effort begin to require force. Disciplines that grounded you quietly loosen. One of the clearest red flags is inconsistency in habits that once stabilized you. Sleep patterns drift, morning routines disappear. Even basic structure becomes harder to maintain. Another behavioral sign is avoidance, quiet postponement. You delay important conversations. You put off meaningful work. Spiritual attack often disrupts follow-through. You start things but don't finish them. Motivation comes in bursts, then fades. Notice changes in how you care for yourself. Nutrition slips, movement decreases, indifference replaces intention. Another red flag is compulsive distraction, endless scrolling, constant noise, stimulation replacing awareness. Pay attention to social patterns. You withdraw from nourishing connections while staying available for draining ones. Spiritual attack also shows up as weakened boundaries. You tolerate what you once questioned. Another behavioral change is loss of intentionality. Days feel reactive instead of directed. Procrastination pairs with self-criticism. Delay followed by shame. Spiritual interference targets consistency more than intensity. Presence fades. Moments blur. Over time, these shifts compound quietly. Spiritual attack embeds itself through erosion, not panic. Spiritual attack is reinforced externally through environments and relationships that feel normal but drain alignment. Prolonged exposure to noise, negativity, and emotional chaos weakens peace. Relationships that mock growth or normalize stagnation lower inner standards. Emotional dependency drains autonomy. Fear-based conversations exhaust discernment. Resistance to solitude blocks recalibration. Media that promotes outrage and instant gratification dysregulates the nervous system. Misalignment becomes normalized. Lack of supportive mirrors weakens clarity. Busyness replaces presence. Boundaries blur. What feels normal is not always healthy. Then the attack turns personal. Identity distorts. Self-trust weakens. You blame yourself for depletion. Discernment is reframed as overthinking. The inner voice becomes hostile. Purpose feels distant. Worthiness feels conditional. Shame appears without cause. You shrink. Struggle feels permanent. Authority fades. Exhaustion becomes identity, and because this feels personal, it goes unquestioned. Then meaning fades. Numbness replaces feeling. Guidance feels distant. Spiritual practices feel empty. Cynicism grows. Connection thins. Rest no longer restores. Time blurs. Resignation sets in. But this is not the ending. It is depletion, not destruction. Spiritual attack loses power when it is named. Stillness interrupts noise. Attention restores energy. Structure stabilizes discernment. Small acts of self-trust rebuild authority. Gentle consistency heals. Boundaries protect. Presence dissolves manipulation. Clarity returns quietly. Peace replaces vigilance. Awareness becomes protection. And the final realization emerges where not every low moment is an attack. Discernment replaces fear. Presence anchors clarity. Protection becomes quiet, and alignment becomes maintenance. Honesty restores balance. Meaning anchors the soul. Peace replaces obsession. You were never weak. You were human. And awareness arrived exactly when it was meant to. The greatest protection is not force but clarity. Not fear but alignment. And once alignment is restored, what once felt threatening loses its grip. Quietly, completely, and without drama.